The perpetual twilight of Nethy's prime suited Finn Calder perfectly. While other colonists complained about the planet's dim red sun and the way shadows seemed to move independently across the landscape, Finn found it liberating. For the first time in his 26 years, he could work without the protective eyewear that had marked him as different since childhood. His hypersensitive eyes, a genetic quirk that made normal daylight feel like staring into plasma flames, were finally an advantage. The settlement's other cartographers struggled to map the shadowy valleys and cave systems that dotted this world. But Finn could see every detail with crystalline clarity. "Calder, we need those northern quadrant maps by tomorrow, Captain Rosa." Viga's voice crackled through his cum unit as he knelt beside a strange formation of black stones. Each stone hummed with a frequency he could feel in his bones. "Almost finished with this section, Captain," he replied, running his fingers along the smooth surface. The stones were arranged in perfect spirals, too precise to be natural. "There's something here you should know about. These formations, they're not random geological features," explained. Finn stood, consulting the detailed sketches he'd made in his notebook. Unlike his colleagues who relied on digital mapping tools, he preferred the tactile feedback of pencil. On paper, they're markers. Someone or something placed them deliberately. The patterns repeat every few kilometers, always near water sources or sheltered areas. A long pause. "Are you saying we're not alone out here?" Before Finn could answer, the ground beneath his feet began to vibrate. Not the rumble of seismic activity, but something rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. Started to glow with a faint silver light, pulsing in time with the vibrations. "Captain, I'm going to need to call you back." He switched off the cum and stood perfectly still, letting his enhanced vision adjust to the new light patterns. Glow was spreading outward from the stone circle, creating pathways of silver that snaked through the landscape like veins of starlight. That's when he saw them. They emerged from the shadows between the stones, beings that seemed to be made of living darkness. Tall and graceful, they moved without disturbing the air around them, their forms shifting between solid and ethereal. Where he expected to see faces, there were only gentle indentations that caught and reflected the silver light. Finn's first instinct was to run, but something in their movement held him still. They weren't approaching aggressively. Instead, they seemed curious, tilting their shadow heads as they studied him. One of them glided closer, and Finn noticed it was leaving no footprints in the soft earth. When it was within arm's reach, it extended what might have been a hand toward his face. The touch, when it came, was cool and surprisingly solid. Images flooded his mind, not words or sounds, but pure visual communication. He saw Nethy's prime as it had been centuries ago, before the red sun had dimmed, when it blazed with golden light that would have been agony for his sensitive eyes. He saw these shadow beings, the umbral weavers, as they had been then, hiding in deep caves and underground chambers, forced into the darkness by a sun that burned their ethereal forms. The vision shifted, showing him the gradual dimming of the star, the weavers slowly emerging to reclaim their world, creating the stone markers as territorial boundaries and navigation aids for their people. But it also showed them watching the human ships arrive, curious about these strange beings who built structures that blazed with artificial light. When the touch ended, Finn staggered backward, overwhelmed by the flood of information. The weaver that had touched him gestured toward the stone formation, and toward the path of silver light leading deeper into the valley. "You want me to?" "Follow," Finn said aloud, though he knew they likely didn't understand his words. The weaver's form rippled, and Finn felt a sensation of agreement wash over him. Not heard, but felt, somewhere deeper than his ears. He began walking along the silver path, flanked by several weavers who moved beside him like living shadows. As they traveled deeper into the valley, Finn saw more of their civilization. Structures that looked like crystallized shadow rose from the ground, their surfaces reflecting the silver pathways and complex patterns. Gardens of plants that seemed to absorb light rather than create it swayed in breezes he couldn't feel. The path led to what could only be described as a temple, though it defied every architectural principle Finn knew. It seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously its walls shifting and flowing like captured smoke. At its center sat a figure larger than the others, ancient beyond measure, whose very presence made the air feel thick with accumulated wisdom. This elder Weaver approached Finn slowly, and when their touch came, it was gentler than a whisper. The communication was more complex this time, layered with meaning that took him several moments to unravel. They knew about his condition, his sensitivity to light. They recognized in him a kindred spirit, someone who, like them, had been forced to adapt to a world that didn't quite fit his nature. They had been watching the human settlement, concerned about the bright lights that scared away the nocturnal creatures they depended on for sustenance, but also fascinated by these newcomers, who brought such radiant energy to their dim world. The elders showed him deeper truths about Nephis Prime. The planet was dying, its red sun gradually cooling toward complete darkness. The Weavers had accepted this fate, preparing to retreat once again into deep caves and underground realms. The arrival of humans had given them hope, a possibility they hadn't considered. What if there was a way for both species to share this world? The humans could provide the light and energy the planet needed to sustain life, while the Weavers could offer their knowledge of navigating darkness and their deep understanding of the planet's hidden resources. But first, there would need to be understanding, communication, trust. The elder Weaver gestured toward Finn, then toward the settlement beyond the valley. The meaning was clear. He would be their ambassador, the bridge between shadow and light. Finn felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders, but also a deep sense of purpose. For the first time in his life, his difference wasn't a limitation to overcome, but a gift that could help two species find common ground. "I'll need to bring others," he said, hoping they would understand his intent, if not his words. "My people need to see what I've seen, learn what you've taught me." The ripple of agreement was stronger this time, and Finn sensed approval from the gathered Weavers. They began to guide him back toward the settlement, but along a different path, one that wound through areas where their stone markers were more densely placed. Now, as they walked, Finn realized the markers weren't just territorial boundaries. They were a gift, a navigation system that would allow humans to travel safely through Weaver territory without accidentally disturbing sacred sites or disrupting their delicate ecosystem. When they reached the edge of human territory, the Weavers stopped. The elder touched Finn's forehead one final time, and he felt a new sensation, like a doorway opening in his mind. He would be able to sense their presence now, to find them when he was ready to return with others who might be willing to listen. As he walked back into the settlement, the bright artificial lights that had always been his enemy seemed different. Somehow, less harsh, more purposeful. He understood now that light and shadow weren't opposites but partners, each giving meaning to the other. Captain Vega was waiting for him at the command center, her expression tight with concern. Calder, "Where have you been? You've been missing for 6 hours." Finn looked at his chronometer in surprise. It had felt like minutes, but time clearly moved differently in the Weaver's realm. "I found them, Captain. It's the ones who made the markers, and I think I found a way forward for all of us." He spread his hand-drawn maps across her desk, but these weren't the charts he'd started with that morning, somehow during his time with the Weavers. His sketches had been enhanced with details he couldn't consciously remember adding. Sacred sites were marked with intricate symbols, safe passages were clearly delineated, and resource locations were identified with a precision that would have taken months of conventional surveying to achieve. "How did you... Captain Vega began, then stopped as she noticed the changes in Finn himself. There was something different in his eyes, a depth that hadn't been there before. "They're not what we expected, Captain. They're nothing like what we expected. And I think they might be exactly what we need." As he began to explain what he'd learned, Finn felt the first stirrings of the connection the elder had placed in his mind. Somewhere in the shadowy valleys of Nephis Prime, the Umbral Weavers were preparing for the next phase of contact. And in the bright corridors of the human settlement, a new chapter in interspecies relations was about to begin. The Navigator, who had always worked best in darkness, had finally found his true calling as a bridge between the light and the shadow, between two species who needed each other more than either had realized. 3 weeks had passed since Fincalder's first contact with the Umbral Weavers, and the settlement on Nethys Prime buzzed with a new energy. The initial skepticism had given way to cautious optimism as small groups of colonists began venturing into Weaver territory, guided by Finn's enhanced maps and the strange new sense that allowed him to feel their presence. Dex Morrow stood at the edge of the settlement's industrial sector, his hands pressed against the hull of the massive terraforming engine that had been silent for days. The vibrations told him everything he needed to know about its condition, a language his deaf ears had learned to read with perfect fluency. The harmonic resonance patterns were all wrong, indicating stress fractures in the core assembly that could prove catastrophic if left unchecked. Chief, botanist Iris Nakamura, approached from behind, her footsteps creating distinct pressure waves that Dex felt through the metal decking. He turned to face her, reading the concern in her expression before she even began signing. "The atmospheric processors are failing too," she communicated through precise hand movements. "Without them, we'll lose the oxygen gardens within a month. The Weaver territory might be our only option for finding compatible flora, but we need a way to understand their ecosystem first." Dex nodded grimly. The settlement's survival had always depended on a delicate balance of technology and adaptation. Now, with their primary life support systems beginning to fail, that balance was shifting towards something none of them had anticipated: complete dependence on cooperation with an alien species. He felt the familiar flutter of vibrations that meant his personal communicator was activating. The device, one of his own designs, translated spoken words into tactile patterns against his wrist. Captain Viga's voice came through as gentle pulses and rhythms. "Dex, we need you in the Eastern Quadrant. Finn's found something that might interest you." The journey to the Eastern Quadrant took him through areas of Nethys Prime he'd never seen before. The landscape here was different, more geometric, with formations that looked almost architectural in their precision. As they walked, Iris pointed out plants unlike anything in their botanical databases. Vegetation that seemed to thrive in the dim red light while producing an unusual bioluminescent glow. Finn was waiting for them beside a structure that defied easy description. It rose from the ground like a twisted spire of crystal and metal, surface covered in intricate patterns that seemed to shift and flow when viewed from different angles. The entire structure hummed with a frequency that Dex could feel resonating in his chest. "The Weavers led me here," Finn explained, his hands moving in the sign language he'd been learning to communicate with Dex. "They say it's old, older than their civilization, but they think you might understand it in ways they don't." Dex approached the structure cautiously, placing his hands against its surface. The vibrations were immediate and complex, layered harmonics that spoke of incredible engineering and purposes he couldn't yet fathom. As he explored the base of the structure, his fingers found what felt like control interfaces, though their design was utterly alien. When he pressed against one of the panels, the structure's humming changed pitch, began to glow more brightly, and suddenly the air around them filled with sound, visible to Dex as ripples of pressure and movement. But this wasn't random noise. It was music, incredibly complex harmonies that seemed to tell stories without words. As the song continued, shapes began to form in the air around the structure. Holographic projections that showed images of Nethys Prime from ages past. Iris gasped audibly, her excitement creating small tremors in the ground that Dex could feel. The projections showed the planet during its golden age, when the sun burned bright and the surface bloomed with life. But they also showed something else, a network of these crystal structures spread across the planet's surface, each one contributing to a planetary harmony that maintained the delicate balance of the ecosystem. The music told the story of the structure's creators, a species that had transcended physical form eons ago, but had left behind these monuments to help future civilizations understand the planet's needs. The resonant singers, as the projections named them, had built this network as a gift to whoever might inherit Nethys Prime. As the images continued, Dex began to understand the true scope of what they were seeing. The structures weren't just monuments, they were tools. Each one was designed to harmonize with the planet's natural frequencies, to amplify and direct energy in ways that could heal the dying sun and restore the world's vitality, but they needed operators, beings who could understand their harmonic language and work with them as partners rather than trying to control them through force. The music reached a crescendo. Suddenly Dex could hear it, not with his ears, which had never functioned, but through some deeper sense that the structure had awakened in him. The vibrations were translating themselves into something beyond sound, a form of communication that bypassed physical hearing entirely. The resonance singers were still there, he realized. It's not gone, but transformed into something that existed. As pure harmony, as living music that flowed through the crystal network, they had been waiting for someone who could bridge the gap between technological understanding and harmonic intuition. As the projection faded, 3 figures emerged from behind the structure. Not umbral weavers this time, but something else entirely. They appeared to be made of living crystal, their forms shifting and refracting light in patterns that hurt to look at directly. When they moved, they created sounds like wind chimes mixed with singing crystal, harmonies that Dex could feel in every cell of his body. The lead figure approached him slowly, its crystalline hand extending toward his face. When they touched, Dex felt a surge of connection unlike anything he'd experienced. The resonance singer was sharing its knowledge directly, showing him how to read the harmonic patterns of the planetary network, how to tune the structures to work in concert with each other. But more than that, it was offering him a choice. The network needed a conductor, someone who could coordinate the harmony across the entire planet. The role would require him to partially merge with the crystal consciousness, to become something between human and resonance singer. It would mean giving up some of his humanity, but gaining the ability to literally reshape the world through music and vibration. The dying sun could be rekindled, the ecosystem restored, and both human and weaver civilizations could thrive in the renewed paradise. Dex looked at Iris and Finn, seeing the hope and trust in their expressions. He thought about the failing life support systems back at the settlement, about the umbral weavers who had already lost so much to the dimming sun. He thought about the gift the resonance singers were offering, not just to him, but to all the species that called Nethes Prime home. He pressed his hand more firmly against the crystal being's touch, accepting the connection. The transformation was gradual, but profound. He felt his consciousness expanding, connecting to the network of structures across the planet. Through them, he could sense every vibration, every harmonic frequency, every rhythm of the world's heartbeat. But he was still himself, still Dex Moreau, the engineer who spoke in vibrations and built bridges between worlds. Now, he just had a larger workspace and more sophisticated tools as he began to attune the network. The very air around them started to change. The red sun overhead seemed to pulse brighter, and the bioluminescent plants began to glow more intensely. In the distance, they could see other crystal structures across the landscape beginning to activate, adding their voices to a symphony that was slowly bringing Nethes Prime back to life. The resonant singers communicated their approval through harmonies that made the ground itself sing. And Dex knew that the first phase of the planet's restoration had begun. But there was still more work to do, more connections to make, more understanding to build between the 3 species that would share this reborn world. 6 months after the activation of the resonance network, Nethes Prime was transforming in ways that defied all previous expectations. The red sun now pulsed with renewed vigor, its light shifting gradually from crimson to amber as the crystal structures channeled harmonic energy into its core. The atmosphere grew richer each day, and the landscape bloomed with hybrid vegetation that seemed to bridge the gap between human agricultural needs and native weaver ecology. Naya Santos moved through the medical bay with practiced silence, her hand speaking volumes to her patients even when her voice could not. The young medic had always found peace in the quiet efficiency of healing work. But lately, her responsibilities had expanded far beyond treating colonist injuries and illnesses. The integration of 3 species on Nethes Prime had created medical challenges no textbook had ever covered. Human physiology was adapting to the planet's changing atmosphere in unexpected ways. The umbral weavers suffered from occasional light sickness when exposed to the brightening sun for too long. And the resonance singers, in their crystalline forms, experienced fractures and harmonic discord that required entirely new approaches to treatment. Security Chief Blake Torres watched from the doorway as Naya examined a young weaver who had been injured during a construction accident. The shadow being's form flickered unstably, losing cohesion at the edges where the trauma had occurred. Blake's initial skepticism about interspecies cooperation had gradually given way to protective concern for all the settlement's inhabitants. "Regardless of their origin, how is she?" he asked, using the sign language that most of the settlement had learned by necessity. Naya's hands moved in careful, precise gestures. The injury disrupted her ethereal matrix. It's similar to a severe concussion in humans, but the treatment methods are completely different. I need to find a way to stabilize her energy patterns. The challenge was that Naya's medical training, extensive as it was, had been designed entirely around carbon-based biology. The weavers existed as organized energy within a semi-physical matrix, while the resonant singers were living crystalline structures with harmonic life forces. Traditional medicine was useless for treating either species. But Naya had discovered something during the past months of working with alien patients. The empathic abilities that had always been a minor aspect of her bedside manner were growing stronger, more precise. She could sense the emotional and physical states of her patients with increasing clarity, regardless of their species. And more importantly, she was beginning to understand that healing was about more than just treating symptoms. She placed her hands gently on the injured weaver's flickering form. Naya felt the familiar sensation of connection flowing through her fingertips. The weaver's energy pattern was chaotic, full of pain and confusion. But underneath the trauma, she could sense the individual's inherent harmony, the pattern that represented their true self. Slowly, carefully, Naya began to project calm and stability through her touch. It wasn't a conscious process, more like humming a song that she'd never learned but somehow knew by heart. The weaver's form began to solidify, the flickering edges growing more defined as their energy patterns synchronized with Naya's projected calm. Blake watched in amazement as the healing progressed. This wasn't the first time he'd seen Naya work her unusual magic, but it never failed to impress him. She had a gift that went beyond medical training, something that allowed her to bridge the gaps between radically different forms of life. A soft harmonic chime announced the arrival of another patient. One of the resonant singers had manifested in the medical bay, its crystalline form showing visible stress fractures along its left appendage. The being communicated through musical tones that the translation devices rendered as text on nearby. Displays harmony disruption during network synchronization. Require stabilization assistance. Naya finished stabilizing the weaver patient, who gestured gratefully before fading into the shadows to rest. Then she turned her attention to the resonant singer, her approach shifting to match the being's crystalline nature. With the singer, healing required a different approach. Instead of projecting calm, she needed to help the being find its optimal harmonic frequency. Naya placed her hands on the singer's fractures and listened, not with her ears, but with the deeper senses that her months of interspecies medical work had awakened. She could feel the discord in the being's structure, places where the harmony was broken or out of tune. Gradually, she began to hum, her throat vibrations creating a resonance that helped guide the singer back to its natural frequency. The stress fractures began to heal as the crystal structure realigned itself, the being's form growing brighter and more coherent. As the healing session concluded, something unexpected happened. Both patients, the weaver and the resonant singer, began to communicate directly with each other for the first time. The weaver's shadow touch and the singer's harmonic pattern seemed to find a common language in Naya's presence, as if her healing work had created a bridge between their different forms of consciousness. Blake stepped forward, his security training making him alert to any potential complications. But what he saw was the opposite of conflict. The three beings, representing all the intelligent species on Nephis Prime, were sharing something profound. A moment of understanding that transcended their physical differences. The weaver gestured toward the viewing port that showed the transformed landscape outside. The resonant singer's harmonics translated as words of wonder and gratitude. Naya, her hands moving in sign language, interpreted for all of them. They're saying this is what they've been hoping for. It's not just coexistence, but true cooperation. The healing of the planet has created the possibility for healing between peoples. Over the following days, word of the Medical Bay incident spread. Throughout the settlement, representatives from all three species began gathering in the area around Naya's workplace, not because they needed medical attention, but because something about her presence facilitated communication and understanding. Between groups that had struggled to find common ground, Finn arrived one morning with a delegation of umbral weavers who had been working on expanding the settlement's shadow gardens. Dex manifested through the crystal network, his consciousness now able to project through any of the resonant structures. Captain Vega and other senior staff joined them, along with several resonance singers whose harmonics filled the air with complex melodies. "It's remarkable," Captain Vega said, watching as weavers, singers, and humans worked together on plans. "For expanding the settlement, in 6 months, we've gone from barely surviving to planning a true multicultural civilization." Naya nodded, but her attention was focused on something else. Through her enhanced empathic senses, she could feel the deeper currents of emotion and intention flowing between the gathered beings. There was hope, yes, and excitement about the future. But there was also something else. A shared recognition that they were part of something larger than any of their individual species. The Memory Keepers arrived as the sun reached its zenith, their forms unlike anything any of the three species had encountered before. They appeared to be made of living light, constantly shifting patterns of energy that somehow conveyed vast intelligence and ancient wisdom. When they communicated, it was directly into the minds of everyone present, regardless of species or sensory capabilities. "We are the Memory Keepers of this galaxy." Their collective voice resonated in every consciousness. "We preserve the histories of civilizations, stories of cooperation and conflict, the lessons learned and lost across the ages." The lead Memory Keeper approached Naya, its light form pulsing with gentle warmth. "You have done something remarkable. Here, healer of minds and bridges of hearts. In all our vast archives, we have rarely seen three species achieve such rapid and genuine integration." Naya felt a familiar sensation as the Memory Keeper's essence touched her consciousness. But instead of projecting healing or calm, she found herself receiving something wonderful. The shared memories and experiences of every successful interspecies cooperation the Memory Keepers had ever witnessed. She saw worlds where different forms of life had come together to create civilizations that surpassed anything their individual species could have achieved alone. She witnessed the birth of galactic communities built on mutual respect and shared wisdom. And she understood that Nethys Prime was becoming something special. A beacon of possibility in a galaxy too often marked by conflict and misunderstanding. But the Memory Keepers had come for more than just observation. They were offering Naya and her companions something unprecedented: membership in the Galactic Harmony Initiative. A network of worlds and species committed to fostering cooperation and understanding throughout the galaxy. "Your planet will serve as a model and training ground," the Memory Keeper explained. "Others will come here to learn how to bridge the gaps between different forms of consciousness, different ways of experiencing reality, and you, all of you, will be the teachers." As the implications sank in, Naya felt a surge of emotion from every being present. The umbral weavers rippled with excitement, their shadow forms dancing in patterns of joy. The resonant singers filled the air with harmonies of celebration. The humans grinned and laughed and embraced each other, and Naya, who had never spoken a word aloud in her life, found herself laughing silently as tears of happiness rolled down her cheeks. She looked around at the impossible gathering of beings who had become not just her patients, but her friends, her family, her partners in building something beautiful. Blake stepped up beside her, his own eyes bright with emotion. "So what happens now?" he asked in sign language. Naya's hands moved in response, her gestures visible to everyone present. "Now, we keep doing what we've been doing. We heal what's broken, we build what's needed, and we learn from each other. But we do it knowing that we're not alone anymore, that we're part of something bigger." As the day progressed and plans began to form for welcoming the first interspecies diplomatic missions to Nethys Prime, Naya realized that her role was evolving once again. She would still be a healer, but now she would also be something more: a bridge between worlds, teacher of empathy, a guardian of the understanding that had grown between three species who had once been strangers. The sun set that evening over a world transformed, its amber light painting the integrated settlements in crystal spires and shadow gardens in hues of hope. And in the medical bay that had become an unexpected center of diplomacy, Naya Santos continued her work of healing. Knowing that every patient she treated, every bridge she helped build between different forms of consciousness, was contributing to something larger than any of them had ever imagined. The healer who had never spoken had found her voice in the universal language of compassion. That voice was helping to sing a new song of cooperation across the galaxy. In the growing harmony of Nethys Prime, 3 species had discovered that their differences were not obstacles to overcome, but strengths to be celebrated and shared. And this was only the beginning.